Okay. All right. So it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker and GOMMEA member, Bob Duchesne, author, birder, guide, and former Maine representative and retired DJ. Done a lot of really amazing things. It's such a pleasure to have you here tonight, Bob. So Bob has established a birding company, weekly birding column in the Bangor Daily News, and column in Woods and Waters. With the many hats he wears, he is also vice president of the Maine Audubon's Penobscot Valley chapter and has developed the Maine Birding Trail. Just great. You can check it out online. Has a great YouTube channel about birding in Maine and other places around the United States. Some of my favorites include Maine is Weird, Ducks in Love, Whale Birds, and Go Birding in Northern Maine Without Dying. So we will make this recording available to members through, again, the website when you log on. So we are, as you can see, recording, and you'll have access to that later. And with that, so thank you, Bob, so much for being here tonight and helping us learn more about winter seabirds and the Christmas bird count.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a somewhat Maine-centric presentation. I recognize we have a lot of people from New Hampshire. I just want to assure you that I was born in Franklin, New Hampshire, and graduated from Bishop Brady High School in Concord, so I can speak New Hampshire if we have to. I was given the challenge of doing two different subjects tonight, Christmas bird count in the Gulf of Maine, but as I kept working on this, they just kept interweaving with each other. So I'll probably seesaw back and forth. I'm going to assume that most people are familiar with some of what I'm saying, not necessarily everything. So there'll be a mix of things you've heard before and maybe some stuff you haven't heard before. Let's start with that Christmas bird count because it has a very interesting history. Back, all right, there we go. So back in the 19th century, there was a Christmas side hunt where this was the sporting event of the year. They'd go out on Christmas, they'd pick up sides, and then all these hunters would go into the woods and shoot everything they saw. If it had fur or feathers, they would shoot it. And at the end of the day, they'd put them all in a pile, and whoever had the biggest pile won. Well, that would shock our sensibilities today, perhaps, but back then it was kind of a normal thing to do. The Christmas bird count started with a gentleman named Frank M. Chapman. He was America's most popular bird guy at that time. He pioneered the writing of field guides. He wrote the Handbook of Birds of North America, which came out in 1895. And he had the idea of, hey, we can count these things without killing them. So he established the Christmas bird count, and the first one was in 1900. In Christmas, they had 27 birders, and they all took to the field and they tallied every bird they could find. And now, 124 years later, we're doing it again. Last year, 76,780 people participated. It is simply huge. Now, so there's Frank. He's the one who established it, 27 participants. We went from this to this. Now, frankly, this is a little bit bogus because the Christmas bird count started before the invention of the automobile, so I cheated on that one. But it's now the longest running science project in the world, citizen science. And it's mostly, of course, New World oriented, but those are all the count circles all over the country. So you get an idea of just how big this thing really is. Counts take place within a circle, each with a diameter of 15 miles. Volunteers survey pre-assigned routes. This prevents multiple participants from surveying the same route accidentally and counting the same birds over and over. And it doesn't prevent birds from being counted twice or missed altogether because birds obviously can fly from one circle to another, and that probably does happen. But because it is so big, all these errors get lost in the metadata, and it all irons out very nicely. So minor variations are just lost. In Maine, MaineAudubon.org is sort of the coordinating, or at least the information for coordinating it is online. So if you wanted to go do something in Maine, all the information, all the counts, all the contact people is right there. The count, I think, started officially today, or certainly it's about to. So MaineAudubon.org would be the clearinghouse of information about how to get into a Christmas bird count in this state. Now, the vast majority of information that's been generated by 76,000 citizen scientists has been invaluable in helping to establish long-term trends. Over the centuries, we've watched southern birds move north. Birds like cardinals have all marched northward. We watched northern birds, such as evening grosbeaks, recede. So we've been able to watch these trends over a very long time. More recently, we've been noticing changes in migration patterns too. I think count a couple of years ago showed that a lot of common birds like black-throated green warbler aren't in such a big rush to get south as we always thought they were. Some are lingering longer. And even birds like scarlet tanagers and Swainson's thrushes, which go to the tropics, are still lingering sometimes by Christmas and sometimes as far north as Canada. So we're seeing some migration trends that didn't used to show up in the data that are now starting to. So this Christmas bird count really helps establish an awful lot of cool stuff. I wanted to find some data, or at least some anecdotes online as I was preparing for the show about what have we learned from all of this. And I came across this list from 2014, Spokane, Washington Audubon. And you get the idea that of the kind of trends we can find from the data that's available in the Christmas bird count. So they say, birds are not climate skeptics. They have spoken with their wings. Many North American species winter ranges have moved northward and inland. The bald eagle is back. The Endangered Species Act works. Many of Maine's most familiar and beloved birds are in serious decline, including evening grosbeak, field and grasshopper sparrows, snow buntings, ruffed grouse. Eurasian collared ducks have invaded the U.S. Peregrine falcons are reclaiming their territory that they lost in the 1950s and 60s. Sage grouse are in deep trouble. More and more hummingbirds are staying in the USA and Canada for winter. Eastern house finches have been moving west for 60 years. How fast and how far West Nile virus has traveled is showing up in the data. And birds are early indications of environmental problems that can affect people. And they refer you back to point number one, which is climate change is real. So one of the things we've noticed is that American crows have increased 282% over the last 52 years. Now, it was kind of common practice for farmers to shoot them because they thought they were stealing all the grain. But a lot of that has declined. There are still hunting seasons. There's an official hunting season in Maine for crows. But frankly, we don't shoot them much anymore. And they've learned to live in cities over the winter. So the population has really exploded very well. And you can see that in the Christmas bird count data. But you also see some really disappointing things, like 68% of the population decline in the common species since 1967. Of the 305 bird species found in North America in the winter, nearly 60% have seen their range go northward, on average about 35 miles, but in some cases a lot further than that. This is a photo of a Carolina chickadee. And for those who are watching its progress, it is slowly inching its way up the eastern seaboard of the United States. It advances a mile or two every year, and it's well into New Jersey now. The thinking is, as climate change accelerates, we may see that get up into New England, probably within the lifetime of some of us here. So we're watching these changes happen in real time, especially thanks to the Christmas bird count. So I had a little extra time this afternoon, and I went onto the National Audubon website, which has a clearinghouse of some of the information from the Christmas bird count. And I just looked up some of the birds that are likely to be on Christmas bird counts in Maine, or birds I had curiosity about. And you're going to notice some trends here, again, as we talk about changes over time and especially climate change. So American goldfinch, it's holding its own. It's increasing ever so slightly. So on the whole, it's doing well. But if you notice, it's doing well better north and doing less well south. We are seeing a shift nationwide as you go south to north of these birds. They're overall doing okay, but there's still a recognizable shift. Bald eagle, yeah, it's true. They've recovered. We stopped poisoning them for the most part. And they are recovering very nicely at almost 4% a year. In fact, it's gotten so serious in Maine that they're probably starting to decrease the number of great blue herons through predation. I had a case, a friend of mine down the lake from me where I live in Maine, got a hold of me earlier this week and said, there's a loon who appears to be stuck in the ice, and he's surrounded by 18 eagles waiting for his demise. So we have a lot of eagles, and it's getting better or worse depending on your perspective. If you're a lunar or great blue heron, it's getting worse. Belted kingfisher. I was curious about this because anecdotally, I've started to see them a little more often in winter, and I was wondering what the trend was. So, on the whole, it stayed about the same in total numbers, maybe a slight decrease on an annual basis. But you'll notice again that it's really shifting northward. We're getting them more in the winter up here than we ever did. They're getting them less in the south than they did. So some of them really aren't going as far as they once did. And when you've got 124 years of data, you can notice these trends over time. Here's my canary in the coal mine. This is the boreal chickadee. You'll notice that it is really receding very fast towards the north and to the northwest. And it's really, really fast. I love this bird. I've been chasing it up and down the Maine coast for years. I used to be able to get it down to the mid-coast area as far south, I think, as I think Vinyl Haven is the lowest I've been able to find it. And I used to have a place where I found them in Deer Isle, Stonington area. They have been receding up the coast so far that I can't even find them up in Lubec most of the time, which is on the Canadian border, all the way up the coast. They have just almost completely disappeared off the coast, really in just 5 years. Certainly in 10. I've just watched the line go up, and now in places I used to find them 80% of the time, I have gone years without seeing one. That's in almost a heartbeat of time that's receded that fast. Northern cardinal, on the other hand, that one keeps pushing north. Now, I will say this is misleading because obviously if you have a count circle in, let's say, Toronto or in southern Ontario, it's going to turn the entire province blue. And so it's going to look wildly blue up there in Quebec and Ontario, for instance, just because that's the way it works, that they color by the entire state or province. So all those birds could be moving north and only be in the southern end of the province, and yet the whole northern end gets colored blue too. So you can't go by the quantity of color, but you can see where the shifts are, and the northern cardinal is definitely moving north and continues to move north quite substantially. So wondering, cedar waxwing, that comes and goes in winter. It's on counts most of the time, and you can see that that is doing well. It's increasing at 1.5% a year, more or less, and it's actually not receding very often in many places. I don't know what's going wrong in New York, but for the most part, that bird is doing okay. Evening grosbeak was mentioned earlier. That one is really crashing. And from the mega data, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what the real story is. This wasn't even known to be a species in existence until about 1850, about 50 years before the Christmas bird count started. And it's always been tied to spruce budworm. So it may be that we're seeing a trend not downward from its historical numbers, but from maybe its peak numbers when we started this thing during a spruce budworm epidemic. It's really hard to tell. Certainly, when I was growing up in New Hampshire, these things were in the backyard in huge numbers. But this was a time when spruce budworm was really rampant in northern New England and Atlantic Canada. So we saw a real explosion at that time and a real decrease since then. Do we really know what the relationship is between the explosion of spruce budworm and the decline of evening grosbeak? No, but it's being studied now by a Finch network, and there's some studies going on in Maine and elsewhere in the country trying to figure that one out. Mourning dove. Pop quiz. What is the most hunted game bird in North America? If you guessed mourning dove, you would be correct. Up here, certainly in Maine, we don't have a season on them. We're sort of at the northern end of their range. But in the southern end, it's a very popular game bird. And in fact, you can see some of the areas where they've declined are areas where they are hunted. But that bird continues to do okay. It faces some competition from other species in other areas, but it's doing all right, and it's increasing about the rate of 1% a year. Rock dove, on the other hand, our pigeons in cities, is doing extremely well. When you look at all the birds that are really city oriented, you would expect them to grow as our population in our cities grow. And that's certainly been happening, except not always. House sparrow, certainly there were more of them when I was growing up than there are now. They are declining at the rate of 2% a year. And in some places, it's really a significant decline, something I never thought I would see happen because You know, they're at every McDonald's parking lot waiting for you to drop French fries. They're at Home Depot in the garden section eating any fallen grain that falls out of the sod bag. So, I mean, they seem to be everywhere, but they're actually on decline. European starling, another European invader released here. They are holding about even, but you see a big shift there as well. More to the north, less to the south. Numbers same, but their distribution is definitely different. Harlequin duck I was curious about because this is a bird that for a long time really, it's on our threatened list in Maine. And for a long time, it was really hard to see. They're getting easier and easier along the coast now. And there are some really good places to see them. Um, and so I was wondering, okay, what is their status? And I looked that one up and noticed that, yeah, it's actually increasing up in the areas where they breed, which is in northern Canada, raging whitewater rivers, and out west in the same kind of habitat. And we are seeing them more coming down here in the winter. So numbers increasing slightly, but you're seeing where that increase is, and that's where they come down here in winter on these Christmas bird counts. One that's really disturbing, another canary in the coal mine, is grassland species are suffering. And you look at this graphic that shows bobolink. All that red area is its traditional habitat, but a lot of that is disappearing, and that's the red area where it's disappearing. You may not be able to see it easily, but there's a blue shade above that up in Canada, which is an increasing amount of habitat in that area for them. So the habitat has shifted as well as the bobolinks, but overall they are really declining badly, as are most grassland species. Here's what I really like to track, because this is where it dovetails back into the whole Gulf of Maine situation and why we do this the way we do. Rusty blackbird has really decreased since 1970. Over the last 50 plus years, it's gone down by up to 90%. Now, that's a 5.5% decrease every year, according to the Christmas bird count. And here's the point I'd like to make. The rusty blackbird nests across the wet northern forests of the continent, places you can't go to count them. The boreal forest, they're in wetlands that are just impenetrable. And of course, this is where there are no people, no roads, no infrastructure. So it would be impossible to count this bird and see these declines if we had to count them up here. But they winter in areas down south, from the middle of the continent on down, where they can be counted. So as far as citizen science goes and our ability to know what the population is doing, it's the winter surveys, Christmas bird counts, that really matter. And that holds true for what happens with the Gulf of Maine now. There are some Christmas bird counts that do happen offshore. Jeff Wells actually goes out to Matinicus somewhere, usually around the 1st of January. He takes a small group out there. Ben Griffiths leads one out of Isla Shoals and Appledore. I think they go out of Portsmouth. Michael Good up in the Bar Harbor area gets on a boat and goes out to Jordan Basin. So there is some counting that does happen in the Gulf of Maine, but most of it really happens from shore, what we can see off the rocks. This is a dovekie, maybe one of the most numerous birds in the world. And they do apparently come south in the winter, but not close to shore. Apparently boats offshore can see these by the thousands. There was a migration event of some kind about a week ago that went by York, Maine, the Neville Lighthouse. Somebody out there watching in bad weather. They were uncountable going by. And that was a phenomenon that nobody had really seen, because usually it happens further out to shore, beyond the reach of normal Christmas bird count. But it does happen. So basically, when we have ducks that we want to count, it's much better to do it in winter. So let's go over some of the species that are in the Gulf of Maine that are coming down for the winter. And common eider being the obvious example. We have a lot that nest along the coast of Maine and New Hampshire and into Massachusetts. But here's basically what you're looking at. It's a saltwater bird. It nests over a wide area, but always on the edge of salt water. That's different than most of the other sea ducks that are coming down to join us. So for instance, scoters, black scoter on the right top, surf scoter on the bottom right, and then the big one is the white wing scoter. We have 3 scoters that all nest in Canada, and they all come down to the coast of Maine and New Hampshire, all the way down really into the southern states as well. They can be anywhere along the coastline as they flood out of Canada and come to water that isn't frozen. But their actual range up in the north is kind of fascinating. First of all, Surf scoters are freshwater nesters. All the scoters are. Surf scoters will even nest in small bodies of water, specifically that don't have fish predators that could eat their young. So you'd never find them in a big lake where there's no muskie or northern pike or anything like that. They're all marsh birds. And then they come to the ocean where they spend most of the rest of the year. So their behavior is completely different. And they're also up there where they would be practically uncountable. So if we didn't count them in the winter, we probably couldn't count them at all. We have noticed a very slight decline, and actually the decline sort of stopped back in around the beginning of this century and started to go up again. So that's been good news for the most part for surf scoters. White-winged scoters, and I didn't know this until recently, is pretty much a western breeding bird west of the Great Lakes. And then a lot of them come over here instead of going to the closer Pacific. So we see a lot of that activity is showing up in the Christmas bird counts. And they have declined. They've declined quite a bit. You'll also notice that decline was pretty sharp for a while and then sort of leveled off again back around the turn of the century. Black scoter, on the other hand, is over on this side of the country, up in Quebec for the most part, a little bit of Ontario. It's very much an eastern bird, and that one is declining a lot and is still declining. Or is it? There can be a number of things happening that the Christmas bird counts wouldn't necessarily pick up. But you go back and see references over time. A 1993 study put the decline of the scoter species all at about 1% a year, total decline of 31%. Then there's a group called Partners in Flight, said there's about 500,000 about out there, and they're concerned about a 12 out of 20, meaning it's a species of low concern as far as they knew. And then the International Union for Conservation of Nature lists them as threatened or near threatened. But how much of that is real and how much is relocation? That may be hard to pick up because with a warming ocean, a lot of these could just stop further north than they ever used to, and would escape the circles they used to be in. So it's a little bit hard to say exactly what's going on, but for the most part, we're seeing some of these birds decline. That's why things like this initiative, the Sea Watch taking place at Schoodic Point in Acadia National Park every fall, is so important because the birds are migrating right past there. There's this one spot that just faces out into the ocean, and biologists stationed there every morning for a count for several hours, counting every one of these ducks that goes by. And we can get a good sample of the entire population of all these ducks that have nested up in northern Canada just by counting the ones that go by this spot. And it's not the only spot. There are some others. There's a big one down in New Jersey, for instance, so we can sort of corroborate the data. But a lot of those birds stop before they ever get to New Jersey. They stop in our own waters here in Maine and New Hampshire. So this count is just exceedingly important to know what's going on because we have birds in decline that are still hunted species. So how do you manage that if you don't exactly know how the population's doing? Grebes, I was fascinated by this. I did not know this until yesterday when I looked them up. And they're pretty much a Western breeding species. Redneck grebe, for the most part, west of the Great Lakes. Horn grebe, even more west of the Great Lakes. And yet a lot of them come over to the shores and waters of Maine and New Hampshire. I mean, I think the majority of them probably do because there are so many out there to see. Loons, you're seeing somewhat the same thing. Red-throated loon is a big one on the right. Common loon up top, of course, is a local breeder. And then the Pacific loon, we get 4 or 5 maybe in Maine waters over the course of a winter. They do show up in extremely small numbers. I think I've seen 4 or 5 in my lifetime in Maine. But the red-throated loon is a curious one because this is a freshwater nester, as the common loon is, but much smaller freshwater. Common loons can't walk on land, but red-throated loons can. Their legs aren't quite so far back. So they nest on puddles all throughout this wet area where we could never count them until they came down here. Mergansers, red-breasted merganser is the one that tends to go to the ocean. The other two, the hooded merganser and common, prefer to be more in freshwater, although they can be in salt, and I see them there sometimes. But this is the range map for red-breasted mergansers. They are really widespread. And then, of course, all that water up there freezes, so they come down here, and we see an awful lot of them. This map, and I should give a shout out to allaboutbirds.org, their lab of Cornell Lab of Ornithology, for providing these maps, which is just a great resource. all about birds.org. But you'll notice there's a little bit of breeding territory down in Maine. We just finished a 5-year bird count, an atlas, figuring out where all the breeding birds were, and we found exactly one family of red-breasted mergansers actually in Maine during that 5-year period. So they may be nesting here, but there aren't many of them. Long-tailed ducks, this one's in serious decline, and it's a hunted bird too. And look how far north they are. They would be absolutely uncountable if we had to count them up there. But because we can do surveys in the winter, then we can count them down here, and we do. Buffleheads, about the same thing. And again, this is another bird that tends to be a little further west than Atlantic Canada. And they nested, they're cavity nesters that nest in flicker holes. If you don't have flickers, you don't have buffleheads nesting up there. And again, in areas that would be almost uncountable if we couldn't count them in the ocean down here. Harlequin ducks, we get back to that one. That one's fascinating. There's a western and an eastern population. They nest in those raging whitewater rivers, and then they come down here. So again, we go back to the white-winged scoter. All of them nest out to the west, and then a lot of them come over to the east coast. And you have to wonder, why are they doing that? And I don't know the answer, but there are some hypotheses, I think, and maybe it's been better research than I've been able to find. But if you're a western bird out there, but on this side of the Rockies, you might have a hard time getting over the Rockies, especially for a duck. So the Rockies are probably a barrier. The prevailing winds coming from the west probably is an aid to fly east for the winter if you want to. And then there's some theory that historically they're genetically programmed to just follow where the ice used to be. So that line, the blue line, is where the glaciers, the extent of the ice age was. And it may be they're following routes that are instinctual over time that didn't change after the ice receded. We see that with a few other birds. Bohemian waxwings will come over and invest Maine and New Hampshire and all of New England, really, and a good part of the lower states as well. But they definitely come from the northwest down to us in that same basic line of where the glacier extent was. Blackpolls are famous for doing this. All of the blackpolls from as far west as you can find them all come east and then south to get down to the Amazon in Brazil. That's where they go, but they're coming east, then going south. That may be following the glacial route, maybe something else, but that's a substantial theory that fascinates a lot of people. So let's talk more about the Gulf of Maine. I cribbed this from the show that Julie was talking about, why Maine is weird, because we are. And New Hampshire, you got some of this too. So I will start with what state is closest to Africa? And if you smell a trick question, you'd be correct. It is Maine. Maine is the closest state to Africa. When I first asked that question to myself, I thought it was Florida. Maybe Cape Cod because it sticks out. I don't know. But no, it's Maine, and here's why. During continental drift and the continents coming together 300 million years ago, this is what the map of the world looked like, Pangaea. And Morocco was the place where we were sort of attached. It goes all the way up to Newfoundland. Morocco would have extended down as far as West Virginia, even south into down into Virginia. But we were really solidly attached right here. And then as things moved apart about 200 million years ago, we're still the closest United States place to Africa. Newfoundland is even closer. In fact, the closest place is Quoddy Head State Park. Quoddy Head State Park on the Canadian border is the closest place to Morocco. So you got these continents that collided and then broke apart again, and suddenly you get a coastline that looks like this. It looks like it's jagged and broken and a real mess. This is a lot of what defines the Gulf of Maine and why we have such rich habitat here. I mean, this is Monhegan, I think. I took this photo. This is what the coast looks like over much of it up this far in New England. Whereas if you get south of here, if you get down into the barrier islands, all the way down from what, Connecticut to South Carolina, it's this. You don't have that same messy coastline that we do up here. So the Gulf of Maine has that feature going for it that attracts an awful lot of this wildlife. So the Maine border coastline runs as the crow flies about 228 miles from Kittery up to Calais. But if you count where the salt water meets the land, we've got about 34,000, almost 3,500 rather, miles of coastline. That's more than California has because our coast is so rugged. So much land hitting salt water puts us up to number 4 on this list. We've got lots of islands because we're such a mess. About 3,200 coastal islands, depending on what the tide is. The registry has about 3,300 islands. Alaska is named about 2,600 of their islands, but there's more than that. They beat us, but not by much. I mean, this is Stonington. This is the archipelago that exists off Stonington. And all these islands are just scattered out there. You look at it from the air, and this is what it looks like. Can you think of any other place along the entire eastern seaboard, from the Canadian border on down, that has this kind of messiness to it? We have so many nooks and crannies that an awful lot of these sea ducks that came down from Canada can tuck in there and winter over in a place where the ice isn't going to freeze and where they get a little bit shelter from storms behind in coves and bays. So the Gulf of Maine has this feature going on that makes it extremely productive for winter birding and for these Christmas bird counts, and also for surveying that we do here. The Ice Age also played just an enormous role. So again, this was about 25,000 years ago. The full extent of that Ice Age went down as far as Maryland, New Jersey, and really peaked, especially in New England. We get clobbered by it. This is in Columbia Falls, I think actually Columbia, Maine. This is one of the big blueberry barrens there for commercial blueberries. And you can see where the ocean was 11,000 years ago. This was a sand dune, and the lower part was the ocean. Just above it is the sand dunes and the uplands. And I was actually standing, I love the spot so much, I was standing on it again 3 days ago. It's fascinating there because you can see what the glaciers did because all the trees have been removed. You can see where the rocks are. You can see where the moraines are. All that is revealed. And what glaciers did to Maine and what did to in New England is all really present right there, and you can see the artifacts. In fact, we have all this well-drained sandy soil in northern New England because the glaciers scraped it off mountains and dumped it around. So blueberries and potatoes grow great in Maine. And certainly I'm familiar with the blueberry fields in New Hampshire. Also left behind a lot of rocks in both states and also all of New England. And these moraines still exist. Most of them covered up in the forest right now, but they're all there. And because we have these blueberry fields and this well-drained soil left behind by glaciers, we have birds that are more typical of the West. This is an upland sandpiper. You would have an easy time finding this in South Dakota or the grasslands of southern Saskatchewan. In New England, not so much, not all that common. Vesper sparrow, even more common out there, but they love the blueberry barrens here, and they love it because of what the glaciers did to us 25,000 years ago. Snow buntings come down here because we look a lot like tundra. Anywhere that's been cleared, you'll find snow buntings coming down in the winter. I just found a whole bunch of them in the last few days. The Gulf of Maine, of course, is well known to everybody. That's why we're all here. Glaciers also formed that, and I'm probably speaking to the choir. You probably know most of this, but earlier glaciers had dumped a whole lot of land out to sea. So the Georges Bank and the Scotian Shelf are all places where debris from former glaciers dumped material out of the ocean 300 miles off what is our shore today and created these barriers to water coming in. You get water coming in from the Northeast Channel, and that was pretty much cold Labrador current. The Gulf of Maine was bypassing us. So we got really cold water in the Gulf of Maine, and that's been good because cold water is rich in nutrients. And that's brought in lots of sea life and all the whales and the sea mammals that we've been cherishing for so long. And we have, of course, islands, as I've already mentioned, and they are full of seabirds, including our iconic puffin in the state of Maine. And we also have common murres and razorbills in the state of Maine. And we have Arctic terns nesting out there in all these islands. And we have whale watching, hats off to Julie, because we have the whales coming up to take advantage of all that food in the cold water of the Gulf of Maine. We've got all these birds coming up here to take advantage of that as well from the South Atlantic. So these are great shearwaters coming up from Tristan da Cunha, which is an island group halfway between South Africa and South America. It's considered to be the most isolated inhabited spot on Earth. And that's the island group where all these guys come from. And there could be thousands and thousands in the Gulf of Maine. Wilson Storm Petrel, same deal. These guys are coming up in the summer when it's winter down there in the Falkland Islands off Argentina and along the coast of Argentina. They're all coming up from down there. Northern gannets are, in the meantime, coming down from their nesting islands in Quebec. They have one in Bonaventure, in Gaspé Peninsula, and then one in Newfoundland as well. Two huge colonies, and they all come down through the Gulf of Maine, taking their time to do it. They're still out there, traipsing through the Gulf of Maine right now on their way south. You know this part already, and it's scary just how fast the Gulf of Maine is warming up. They say it's warming more than 97% faster than the rest of the oceans in the world. In fact, now, according to CBS News and other scientific reports, we're officially in the hottest year ever recorded, and the scientists say the temperature is still rising. So a lot of this that I'm about to share with you comes from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and they've been tracking this, and they say that 2021 was the hottest year on record. I think 23 will beat it, but I haven't seen the official result. 2022 was second hottest. But all of the hottest years are within the last 20 years. So the spike is really enormous. And you can see this graph of how fast we're warming in comparison to the rest of the world's oceans, 3 times faster in the Gulf of Maine. This is not good news. When you have weather anomalies, heat waves in the Gulf, this is the data they show you. 20, 30, 50 years ago, you would have occasional heat waves. Maybe a hot summer, but the real hot summers have all kicked in just the last 13, 14 years. So we're seeing this change coming not just big, but fast. And it's astounding to me why a group of politicians don't get it. Because never mind all the scientific evidence out there, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that we could all just see if we opened our eyes to it. I'm sharing a little bit of frustration, I think, because as was mentioned, I was in the Maine legislature and I was on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee for all 12 years that I served. I'm now on the board of Environmental Protection in Maine. I'm on the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Advisory Council. So I'm bumping into climate change issues all the time. And yet a lot of my colleagues still deny it's even happening or that it's not man-made caused. And it's really hard to fix a problem when you won't even acknowledge it exists. But you don't even have to go to all the science to get it. You can see it happen. This was fascinating to me. This was on the Gulf of Maine Research Institute website. This is from 14 years ago. They said, well, lobstermen, you're out there all the time. What are you seeing? And the results really astounded them because the lobstermen were seeing things and they said it. Soft-shell lobsters used to be very steady. They always used to molt, and you'd have the shedders right around the beginning of 4th of July weekend. You could count on that being your market for that time period. But in recent years, 14 years ago now, this is before a lot of this heat wave, but they were starting to shed at different times. They were shedding as early as March, or sometimes they were shedding later. They were becoming unpredictable about when they were shedding, when for so long they had always been exactly about the same time of year. So lobstermen were certainly seeing it. They're also seeing them migrate. They go to the colder waters offshore in winter, where they're less exposed, I guess, but they migrate offshore and then inshore in the spring. And they were seeing that migration timetable change. In fact, they seem to be moving offshore faster. And that may be salinity. They were being affected by spring storms more freshwater runoff, or just more rainfall. And so they were going to deeper places. But they were seeing that change in real life out in the Gulf of Maine. And these are just working people. This is not scientists. These are not the elitists that people worry about, that the right seems to worry about. These are people who actually see it happening. And it's making the headlines all the time. It's been coming out recently that about 40% of the baby lobsters are missing out in the Gulf of Maine right now. And it's making headlines like crazy. Same thing with shrimp. Shrimp just made the headlines again in the last 2 weeks. They had to delay opening any kind of season at all for at least another 3 years because, in spite of the fact we have not been fishing these for quite a while, the stock is not rebounding. And they're blaming climate change because the water is starting to get too warm for them to recover their numbers. And it's making the headlines, and people still don't believe it. Whales, you know about whales. They're certainly moving around much more than they used to, and the right whales did come up in the Gulf of Maine more than I think they currently are doing. They seem to be going up towards the Gulf of St. Lawrence more now, I think. And other people can correct me on that, but we are seeing a big shift in what the remaining whales are doing. Ticks. When I was a boy, I didn't know what a tick was. And now it makes the headlines almost every day. The population of ticks and the way they're moving north, the number of ticks that are moving in, the diseases they carry, it's all blamed on climate change because they used to die when the winters got too cold. In real life, this is an existential threat to a lot of northern New England, I would say, especially Maine. I was up in the Maine North Woods doing some bird surveys for that Atlas program that Maine has been doing, and I was up there the beginning of March. The beginning of March when you can count on the roads being frozen, except they weren't. That was big thaw for a whole week. They had to take the trucks out of the woods or run them at night when the roads would freeze up enough to be able to get the trucks to move in the mud again. And that's early March. That's like a month or more before traditionally they would have to stop logging. So if we can't even get the loggings out of the woods at the rate we used to, that affects our forest industry quite a bit. And that's only number two, I think. Forest products is number two to vacation tourism in Maine. So this is an existential threat. Losing our lobsters, losing our sea fisheries is an existential threat due to climate change, and yet some people still don't get it. So you can even see this with people. Growing up, you didn't see the kind of homelessness in tent encampments in northern cities the way you do now. You couldn't survive our winter then, but even people are finding a way to overwinter in areas where they couldn't before because of climate change. So we're seeing it, and it's in the headlines all the time. So I'll switch to a happier note and just talk a little bit about what is out there in the Gulf of Maine so that we can all enjoy it, and may even run through and show you a few places to go, especially in southern Maine. But common eiders, now these do nest all up and down most of the northern New England shore, but they nest even more up in Canada, and you saw the maps of where they do nest earlier. King eider does come down here. That's a rare bird that we don't see very often, but 2 or 3 will show up somewhere in Maine and New Hampshire waters, and we're always looking for it. The golden eyes, common golden eye on the left, Barrow's golden eye on the right. Barrows are much more common out west, but there are some up in Atlantic Canada, and we do see them occasionally on the shoreline here. Long-tailed ducks come all the way from nearly the Arctic Circle down here, and bobbleheads doing likewise. Ruddy ducks, I didn't mention that one earlier, but ruddy ducks are a bird that will show up in salt water. There used to be some places where, in the mid-coast area, where I'd be able to find them in the winter. Harlequin ducks we talked about. In fact, I'll just briefly go back to Harlequin ducks for a moment because we may mention this, or you may hear from Julie about this later. But the longest time, they really didn't get close to the shoreline in New England, but now they're doing that more. For the longest time, the biggest concentration, and it still is off the southern end of Isle Ho. These guys nest in freshwater rivers, running torrents of water. That's their habitat when they nest, and they love the pounding surf where no other bird dares to go because they can fight for the food there and not have any competition. The truth is, when you dissect these birds, you find out they get hurt and broken bones all the time. But their superpower is they mend really fast. And so to find the concentrations we still do off Isle Ho is great. And for the longest time, my chapter of Maine Audubon, the Penobscot Valley chapter, has done boat trips out there to see this. For a while, we stopped, but now we've discovered, because of that archipelago that you saw earlier of Stonington, all those islands off there shelter so many sea ducks that we revived the trip a few years ago, and we're going out on March 23rd. There's room for 25 people, and you're invited. Just getting hold of the Isle Ho Ferry, Isle Ho Boat Services, and book yourself in that trip because that is awesome. Been out there in sleet that was driving sidewards on one winter day and still had great time. I would do that again in a heartbeat. I never missed that trip. Purple sandpipers. It may be that Maine gets all the purple sandpipers in the world on the East Coast nowadays. They do get a little bit south of here, but for the most part, we get our biggest concentration. And this is a species that's been cut by half. They're really plummeting. Of course, the alcids we have out in the Gulf of Maine make the Gulf of Maine somewhat famous for this because you can't get them south of here. Black guillemots, of course, they go to white in winter. Razorbills get whiter in winter. Common murres, that's a funny thing. They seem to get replaced by thick-billed murres. The closest place I know that these nest is Witless Bay up in Newfoundland. But some of them do come down into the Gulf of Maine in winter. Dovekie, as I mentioned, this may be one of the most common birds in the world, and they're probably out there further offshore in the Gulf of Maine, but they're out there. Double-crested cormorant, for the most part, leave, and the great cormorants that nest offshore or come down from Canada will move on to shore, and we start to see those much more in winter in the Gulf of Maine. Northern gannets still migrating through. The great shearwater is only a summer bird because it's winter down there where they're coming from. Same thing with sooty shearwaters. They nest off the coast of Argentina, and there's another population over near New Zealand. So you get a whole bunch on the west coast, you get these in the east coast, and they're coming from different places, but it's the same species. And then Manx shearwater. Actually, I think they're trying to nest on Matinicus Rock. I actually saw one on one of the puffin trips out to Isle Ho, or out to Seal Island earlier this year. So they're starting to get a foothold. It's mostly nesting in Europe, but they have investigated the Maine coast for a while. And then the Cory shearwater, which nests just off the coast of Spain, has been coming over to take advantage of our surplus. And I had a better time finding these this year. I saw, I think, one off that trip to Seal Island for the puffin trip, and two off the Bar Harbor Whale Watch this summer. So I was pretty impressed. I had only seen one ever before, but they are starting to show up more often too. And then we have some of those mean birds, the parasitic Jaeger that comes down from the Arctic, the Pomeranian Jaeger, they're out there. Great skua, northern nester, and the South Polar skua, southern nester, will also come into the Gulf of Maine in order to snatch food from other birds. Wilson storm petrel, I mentioned these are coming up from the Falkland Islands and Antarctica. Leach's storm petrel nests in our islands offshore here, including Appledore, New Hampshire, and all the way up the coast. Redneck phalaropes, prairie pothole bird that comes over to here to nest, to swarm in the fall. Same thing with red phalaropes. And we have the terns, common tern, Arctic tern, and roseate tern that all nest on islands off the coast of Maine. Real quick, I'm just going to touch on the southern coast because I'm using up all of my time, but these are some of the best places to look if you want to find seabirds right off the rocks in the coast of Maine. And this is shot off Marginal Way. And it's like this. I think it's the best place to find seabirds really close and easy to watch is Marginal Way in Ogunquit. Another good place is the Nubble Light in York at Sohere Park. I go there every winter. If I'm driving by accidentally and I put it on my hands, I will go there to look at the incredible number of ducks that show up there. Marginal Way, as I say, is about a 1 mile walk out of Perkins Cove in Ogunquit up north towards the beaches. And it's a great walk the whole way. And the ducks are just right off the rocks there. Biddeford Pool is another place that's really popular, especially for ducks. They have a beach. They have that inland wetland pool area. They've got rocks and a rocky coastline right off the eastern shore. There's even a place called East Point, which is an Audubon sanctuary that is great for sea duck watching. Then you get up into the Portland area, and you've got Pine Point coming, the outflow of Scarborough Marsh. You get over to Two Light State Park over there in the eastern side of the area, over in Cape Elizabeth and Kettle Cove. There's Pine Point. That beach is great. The inland area of waterway with the food rushing in and out with the tide, that draws a lot of birds in there. And as I said, the beach is good. And Pine Point Jetty is like my secret spot because if there are shorebirds around, they're almost always going to wait for the tide to change out there in the rocks. And so I often will go and just take a peek at what's out there at the end. And sometimes it is just covered with birds right into winter. Sanderlings will winter over in Maine and New Hampshire, and they will gather out there even in the dead of winter, coldest day. Little further up the coast, that's the Cape Elizabeth area I was talking about. And so you got Two Lights State Park and Two Lights at Dyer Point. And those are great places to jut into the ocean where you can really see what's going on. And the Harlequin ducks have moved in there in big numbers. I was really shocked at how big the flocks have gotten. This just happens to be one of the best places to get seafood right there at Dyer Point. And you get up into Back Cove, Portland, etc. And I will probably stop right there because I want to allow at least a few minutes for any questions you might have. And otherwise, I'll conclude my discussion right there and stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, we can certainly open up for questions. Happy to either unmute yourself or use the chat, whichever you would like to do. It's time we've got left. But that was great. Thank you so much.
Also looking down at the chat to see if anything posted. Anything? Favorite bird. Somebody asked what my favorite bird is. Oh, I'm so glad you asked. It's a spruce grouse. Spruce grouse, it's only in the northern forest of Maine and New Hampshire. And well, it's declined so much in the Adirondacks, they can't find it anymore. But it's a northern bird, and it's not huntable in this area. And so they are just so tame. And the males go back to the same spot every year to breed. They hold their territory. So you can actually get to know individual birds. And I have. I've given names to about 20 of the ones I know. And I'll go back and visit them periodically. And they each one have their own special personality. It's amazing to me that some are really bold, some are a little more shy. Some of them are clowns. There's one on Scooted Point right now that is so aggressive about chasing people out of his territory, they will sit on their heads. He impressed a lot. He was the lifer for a lot of people this year. I've got one over at Petite Banane National Wildlife Refuge that I call Louie. And he's been the most aggressive bird I know, but I see he's getting old because he's slowed down a step. So spruce grouse, my favorite bird. Binoculars for bird watching. That could be another hour. I think the biggest recommendation I would make is go to a store that has a lot of them and try them out because it's very much personal. Personally, I find that 10 by 50 is a lot of magnification, but you lose a lot. They're heavy. Their focus view is a little bit narrow. My wife has 50s. I find if I can identify a bird, I can do it with 7.5s or 8s as much as I can with 10s. So I go for a little lighter, with more punch to it, better glass. But it really is a personal thing.
Hey, I had my hand raised. Should I ask my question?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Andrea. Bob, I would like for you to add Fort Williams Park to your bird trail.
Which one?
Fort Williams Park.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I should.
Anyway, I started a bird group there a couple of years ago. I work for the Friends of Fort Williams Park.
Okay.
And we start in mid-March and we go through the summer. But there's some great shorebirds, but we also have so many native plants and freshwater, and we have lots of great warblers, everything. It's such a great place for migrating birds and residents.
No, in fact, I've thought about it. I've started to visit there more often in recent years. I think what's always daunted me is the fence along the shoreline. It's like you can see birds, but they're a long way away. Except for except the purple sandpipers. They have a particular rock underneath the lighthouse they like.
Yep, it's fun. We're growing and we have more and more people interested in birding. There's so many great articles come out recently about the benefits of bird watching, and it's gotten very popular. So anyway, if you're in the area, let me know and I would love to walk around with you. So
terrific. Thank you. It's Andrea Southworth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks.
Well, is everyone sick of me? Well, thank you once again for having me, and thank you, Julie, for the invite.
Well, thank you again. It's always such a pleasure to have you. And you've spoken with other groups that I'm a part of, so it's always great. And I always learn something new every time. And look forward to getting out there. Our bird count here, yeah, with Michael. That's Saturday. So
Oh,
yeah. So yay! Yep. I didn't know if anybody else was going out. Part of the. I know that's within like the next. Today is like the official day, right? And then every chapter, every place is a little bit different. But I didn't know if anybody else was going in the next couple of weeks. But go birding. But I appreciate you pointing out the aspects of houses and science that is really important in helping us to understand how things are changing and how the bird count has really helped in us getting like a benchmark of what that looks like.
Yep.
Do you have like a particular bird you still want to see or?
Oh yeah. I have a grudge list, and on top of that grudge list is boreal owl.
There you go.
Tried a number of times, have not been fortunate yet, but I'm not going to give up. And if I have to go up and march into deep Ontario to find the little sucker, I'm going to get that bugger this year.
Did you get to see the Stellar Sea Eagle? That was a question last summer. Yeah.
I did. I didn't see it last year. I saw it the year before. And it's still around. It spent the summer up in Newfoundland, and I don't know the last time it was seen. It is not going to shock me to see it show up again this year.
Yeah. But I've not seen it yet.
It's the size of a school bus.
Yeah, it's a huge
Yeah.
dinosaur bird. Yeah. It's huge. Ruth was asking, what are you seeing for ice gulls? Changes?
Yeah. Ice gulls as in Iceland gulls or white-winged gulls in general, or just I wasn't quite sure.
I was just thinking generally our winter gulls,
okay,
our off-season ones are more northern.
I didn't do any research on that. By and large, I think gulls have declined. Partly that's a good thing because the population had exploded so much. The gull population explosion was man-made caused initially. We took all the trees off island, so they had places to nest. And then all those open-air landfills along the coast for many decades really just fed a population explosion to the detriment of all the other seabirds we have, the nesters. But that is now starting to even out, and we've seen some of those populations decline. And I think even the great blackback gulls have declined. So, but that one is not really related to climate change so much as it's a habitat change.
Yeah, no, I just wondered because I haven't been out looking for some of the more, our visitors, our winter visitors. Seems like I'm seeing a bunch of the Bonapartes in the fall. But
I was surprised to get a black-legged kittiwake over at Scooty Point the other day because usually
they're out there. Seems like we're seeing less kittiwakes though, in places like.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I was so surprised when I got offshore to not see as many kittiwakes.
Well, their colony that up there in just north of Campobello collapsed because of probably a weasel or something or mink moving in, and so that colony has not been active for at least the last 2 years. And that probably fed a lot of our population in this area. So I think population isn't hurting, but I think that particular island has diminished our local numbers.
Yeah, I didn't know if avian flu is still kind of floating out there, been an issue. Particularly with gannets and skuas, I think.
Gannets especially. I certainly noticed a difference this year.
Yeah, it's true. Any other last questions? Lots of thank yous and great presentation, learned a lot. Thank you for all the comments and questions, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. It's a little after 8 now. Unless anyone has any other questions, we'll probably wrap it up for the evening. But thank you again, Bob. That was fantastic. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate everybody that joined us this evening for both the board meeting and the membership meeting. It's just so nice to see new faces, familiar faces. Again, you're all of, what makes GOMMEA GOMMEA. So thank you for being part of our organization. We're looking forward to future events, and you can check that out again on our website, or we're on Facebook. And as members, you should usually get updates via email. But reach out if you have any events or any questions, or in any way want to touch base with anyone here or any other members. So look forward to seeing you all in the near future.
I just wanted to say, this is Derry. Sorry, I shut off my video, but I want to say thank you, Julie, for leading us through this year. And I'm looking forward to the year ahead. And I feel like I've got big shoes to fill, but what a great group of current, past, and new board members. So I'm really excited for the year ahead. So thanks for all you've done, and looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to continuing to work with you, and you're going to do wonderful things as president. And again, to everybody here, thank you. We're all a great bunch of people, and feel fortunate to be surrounded through a network of really great folks. So thank you. All righty, well, I think we'll conclude it for the night. Again, thanks all, and happy holidays and happy birding. If you're doing the count or any birding at all, or just being outdoors, Gulf of Maine wise along the coast. But have a great holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Nice job, Julie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you guys. You're so kind. Felt like
That
I
was great.
Yeah, kind of towards the middle of the meeting, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going over. I need to, I need to hurry up. And I was gonna get a little tongue-tied. So I appreciate it.
No, it was all good. I was trying to navigate both my phone, and finally I just shut my phone off because I was worried about like unmuting myself during Bob's talk, and so that's why I shut off the phone, because I felt like I was going to mess something up. But anyways, thanks, and I'm sure I'll be bugging you as things move forward, I guess. So as president, we're going to keep like, so I've got to notify everybody about the meetings coming up and all that, like that's like in the agendas and getting my act together. So maybe sometime after the holidays we could like chat or something, just to kind of bring myself up to date on what you did, and what, like, just to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I definitely, as like very up to the end, like was always leaning on it, or to referring to Deb and to Jen, and just because it was definitely like a team effort to like help me along, because I had never sat in this position before. So because I think that's what's really important with the directors or the officers positions. Make sure you feel like supported and there's help. And
Yeah.
I wish I had done more. I felt like, I didn't meet as much as I think I should have, but then there's reality, and everyone's busy. But so it was a big learning curve for me, but I'm here to help in any way, and happy to talk about anything you want to go over.
Okay.
And what I could have used through the Google Drive to.
Yeah, like even navigating, maybe, well, I'll reach out and just see if we can catch up, but listen, go put your feet up and have a beer, and or a dark and stormy.
Yeah.
And nice job.
Good. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you have a really nice way of managing things, and very laid back, and I really love it. So I'm gonna try and follow suit.
You've all been so supportive and amazing and patient, and you're going to do amazing too. And I think you have a lot of like really great approaches to things, and I feel going into this, it's just going to be good momentum, and yeah, and kind of just very relaxed and chill and just inviting. So I'm looking forward to your leadership role. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I feel it's a big learning curve, but anyway, so I'm excited that you're here to help, and it'll be
Yeah.
good too with Cassie, kind of, whatever. We can all
Yeah.
learn from each other, which is awesome. But listen, have a good night.
You too. Yeah.
And nice job, and great speaker. He was really awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Bob's fun.
Yeah. No, really, I learned a lot, so it was really good. But all right, well, have a good night, Julie, and happy holidays and a great Christmas and everything.
You too.
All right, talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.